Mr. Hale, this is Ruth Avery. I teach Caroline's second grade. I'm standing on your porch and your daughter says you're inside burning the eggs. The voice came through the screen door of a narrow craftsman on Linden Street at 7:12 on a Tuesday morning, and the woman standing on the boards did not blink. She wore a blue cardigan, brown shoes that had seen rain, and a soft canvas tote slung at her elbow. The neighbor across the way, a retired postman named Roy Mulvey, who later told the story half a dozen times at the diner, said the school year was 11 days old and he had never seen a teacher show up at a parent's door on a Tuesday for any reason but trouble. He thought, watching her stand there, that trouble had come anyway. Inside the kitchen, a man called Wesley Hale stood barefoot on yellow linoleum with a spatula in one hand and a 6-year-old boy on his hip. The eggs were not so much burned as forgotten. He was 34. His shirt was inside out. He had a dark shadow under each eye that looked permanent and a small braided hair tie around his wrist that did not belong to him. His daughter, Caroline, 8 years old, 2 front teeth not yet finished growing in, opened the door because her father had not moved. He didn't burn them on purpose, she said. He's just tired. Ruth Avery stepped inside without being invited, the way a woman steps into a room where a kettle has begun to scream. She set her tote on the counter, took the spatula from Wesley Hale's hand, slid the pan off the burner, and turned the burner off. "Mr. Hale," she said quietly, "your principal called me yesterday." Wesley set his son, Daniel, down on the floor. The boy went straight to her shoes and stared at them. "I'm not in trouble at school," Wesley said. His voice was hoarse, like a man who hadn't used it before noon in a long time. "Caroline, tell her." "Caroline is doing fine," Ruth said. "Caroline is the reason I drove here." Roy Mulvey, watching through his own kitchen window across the street, told the diner later that he saw the woman's blue cardigan move, and then he saw Wesley Hale sit down at the table for the first time that morning and lean his elbows on it the way a man does when somebody has finally said a true sentence to him. It had been 13 months since Eleanor Hale had died. The town knew the shape of it without ever quite saying it. Eleanor had organized the school's coat drive and laughed at her own jokes before the punchline. A truck had crossed a wet line on the highway out by the reservoir last August, and after that, Wesley Hale had become a man people watched from a careful distance, the way you watch a house with one light still burning at 2 in the morning, wondering if anyone is awake inside. He had not gone away. He had done the things. He had buried his wife, returned to his job at the small county insurance office, kept the porch light on, signed the school forms in his uneven hand, paid the gas bill, paid the water bill, packed 2 lunches every morning that grew sadder by the week. He had done the things, and the people of the town had said he was doing the things, and that had been the end of the conversation. Ruth Avery had been hired in July to take over the second grade classroom from a teacher who had retired. She was 29. She came from a town 2 counties over. She was the kind of teacher who learned every child's middle name in the first 3 days. She had noticed Caroline Hale on the 2nd day. By the 11th day, she had driven across town with a covered dish in her tote. In the kitchen, she opened the tote. "This is a chicken and rice casserole," she said. "It is not a gesture. It is your dinner. You can eat it tonight and tomorrow. The dish is mine, and I would like it back next Friday." She set it on the counter. She set down a folded math worksheet beside it. "Caroline didn't turn in her 10 frames yesterday. She told me her dad fell asleep at the table helping her, and she didn't want to wake him. Mr. Hale, I am not here because Caroline is failing. I am here because your daughter is taking care of you, and she is 8. Wesley Hale looked down at the table. His jaw moved twice without making a sound. Then he said, "I don't know how to do this part." "Eggs," Ruth said. "We'll do the eggs first." She did not move toward him. She did not put her hand on his shoulder. She washed out the pan in the sink, cracked 4 new eggs into a bowl, found the salt where any reasonable person kept it, and made breakfast for the children of a man she had met 4 minutes ago. Daniel stayed by her shoes and finally lifted his arms toward her. She handed him a piece of toast instead and said, "2 hands." Roy Mulvey told the diner that he watched the lights stay on in that kitchen until 8:10, and then a tall man in a dress shirt walked out the front door for the first time in a year with a paper bag under his arm and the look of a man who had eaten. It had been the worst week of Wesley Hale's professional life. His supervisor, a man named Glenn Pruitt, had called him into the back office on Friday and said the words, "1 more late slip," which is the corporate way of saying, "We are running out of patience." 3 more written notices and Wesley would lose the insurance job that paid for the rent on the Craftsman, and the gas, and the water, and the school lunches, and the small Sunday flowers he still bought every week because Eleanor had liked them on the kitchen table. He walked into the office at 8:58 that Tuesday, 2 minutes early. Glenn Pruitt looked up, looked at the clock, and looked back down at his paperwork without saying anything. That, Wesley would later say, was the first quiet kindness of the morning. The casserole rode home with him at 5. What no one in town knew, what Ruth Avery herself did not know, sitting in her own apartment at the end of that long day grading 10 frames, was that across town, in the small front parlour of Wesley Hale's mother-in-law, a woman called Vera Brennan had just placed a phone call to a family lawyer. Vera had loved her daughter Eleanor with the fierce, possessive love of a woman who had outlived her husband. She had loved her grandchildren the same way. Since the accident, she had watched her son-in-law from the front pew of the same church and decided, in the quiet pride of her grief, that Wesley Hale was not enough. He had not been enough as a husband. She had thought so when Eleanor first brought him home. He was not enough as a widower. He forgot to comb Caroline's hair. He fed them eggs. On Wednesday morning, Caroline's hair was combed. Daniel had eaten a real breakfast. Ruth Avery, sitting in her own classroom across town, did not know that either. She came back on Thursday. She did not bring a casserole this time. She brought, instead, a small spiral notebook with a green cover, and she sat down at the kitchen table with Wesley Hale and Caroline after school and said, "We're going to write down everything so your father stops carrying it in his head." She wrote, Monday, library books due. Tuesday, Caroline 10 frames. Wednesday, Daniel's speech screening at school, 10 in the morning. Thursday, pay water bill. Friday, return Mrs. Avery's casserole dish. She passed the notebook to Caroline, who held it with both hands the way a child holds a hymnal. "You don't have to be the grown-up," Ruth said to the girl, "but you can be the keeper of the notebook. That is a real job." When Wesley walked Ruth to the porch that night, he stood with one hand on the railing and said, very quietly, "I don't know why you're doing this." Ruth Avery was a careful person who chose her words the way a woman picks blueberries, one at a time, and never the green ones. She thought for a long moment before she answered. "Because your daughter asked me what a casserole was," she said, "and then she asked me how you make one." "Mr. Hale, that is the question of a child who is trying to learn a job she should not have. So, I am teaching her one thing at a time, and I am teaching you the rest. That is all." She walked down the steps without saying goodnight. Roy Mulvey saw her go. He saw Wesley Hale stand on his porch for a long moment afterward, looking up at a sky that had a clean half moon in it, and then turn around and go back into a house with 2 children in it and a kitchen that had been quiet for 13 months and was, that night, a little less quiet. On the second Tuesday of October, Vera Brennan filed a petition for partial custody of her grandchildren. The papers came to the craftsman in a manila envelope at 4 in the afternoon, and Wesley Hale opened them at his kitchen table, with Caroline doing her homework on one side and Daniel colouring a paper pumpkin on the other. He read the first page twice. He read the second page once. He set the envelope down very carefully. The way you set down something you do not want the children to know is heavy. He called Ruth Avery at 6. "I'm calling because you gave Caroline your number for emergencies," he said, "and I think this might be one." She came over. She sat at the table. She read the petition. Vera's lawyer had written it in the cold language of fitness and stability, and the words were ugly because they were almost true. The father has been observed grieving for 13 months. He has received 1 written warning at his place of employment. The household lacks a consistent female presence. The older child appears to be assuming parental responsibilities. Ruth Avery read it twice, slowly. She did not flinch, and she did not soften. She set it down. She looked at Wesley Hale across the table. "This," she said, "is a list of every kind of help you have not had." She found him a lawyer. The lawyer was her cousin's husband, a man named Owen Drake who practiced family law in the next county and answered Ruth's call at 8:30 at night because that was the kind of family she came from. Owen Drake spent 40 minutes on the phone with Wesley, asked him for receipts, calendars, the green spiral notebook, and the names of 3 people who would speak for him. The first name, Wesley said, was Ruth Avery's. The second was Roy Mulvey's. The third, after he had to think about it, was Glenn Pruitt's. The hearing was set for the 3rd Thursday of November. The town began to gather around the craftsman the way a town does. Roy Mulvey came over Saturday morning and replaced the broken hinge on the back gate. The pastor's wife sent a pot roast on Sunday. Glenn Pruitt walked up to Wesley's desk on Monday and said, "I heard about the papers. You leave at 3 on Thursday. I'll cover the rest." He said it without looking at Wesley, the way men who don't know how to be kind try to be kind. Caroline took the green notebook to school every day and wrote down what her teacher said about her father. He came on time today. He brought the field trip form. He brushed my hair without pulling. Ruth told her, gently, that the notebook would not need to come to court. Caroline said she knew. She kept writing it anyway. In the kitchen, in the evenings, Ruth taught Wesley how to braise a chicken. She taught him that meatloaf could be made on a Sunday and eaten on a Wednesday. She taught him how to read Daniel's bedtime book in the voice the book asked for, instead of the tired voice of a man who had read it 300 times. She taught Caroline how to write a thank you note. She taught Wesley that asking for help was not the same as failing. She did not stay past 9. She did not call it anything, and Wesley did not ask her to. He understood that a thing too quickly named is sometimes a thing too quickly broken. One night in early November, with the first real cold pressing on the windows, Daniel woke up crying for his mother. Wesley went into the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed and did not know what to say. He had not yet learned the sentence for that. He sat there a long time. He put a hand on the back of his son's head the way Eleanor used to. He hummed 2 bars of a song he had not thought of in a year, and the boy's breathing slowed. After a while he said, very quietly, Mom isn't coming back, Danny, but there are still a lot of us. There's Caroline, there's Grandma Vera, there's me, and there's Mrs. Avery, who teaches your sister and knows how to fix the eggs. Daniel did not answer. He fell asleep with 2 fingers wrapped around his father's thumb. Wesley sat in the dark for another half hour, and somewhere in that half hour, he decided he would not be late to work again, and he would learn the sentence for everything else, 1 sentence at a time, for as long as it took. The next morning at breakfast, Daniel sat very close to Ruth Avery's shoes again. He looked at her for a long time over a piece of toast. Then he said, in the small, certain voice of a 6-year-old, you make the table look full. Ruth Avery, who had been a careful person all her life, set down her coffee and did not trust herself to speak for a minute. Wesley Hale watched her across his own kitchen and understood, for the first time in 13 months, what a found family was. It was not a replacement of anything. It was not a forgetting of anyone. It was the addition of a chair to a table that had been 1 chair short for too long. The hearing, when it came, lasted 94 minutes. Owen Drake brought the green notebook. He brought the casserole dish, returned. He brought Roy Mulvey, who told the judge in his careful old voice that he had watched the kitchen light come back on in that house. He brought Glenn Pruitt, who had taken a half day off work and showed up in a tie. He brought Caroline's teacher, who testified for 11 minutes about the consistent female presence in the 2nd grade classroom and the difference between a struggling father and an unfit one. The judge, a woman in her late 50s with reading glasses on a beaded chain, listened without expression for most of it. She asked Wesley 1 question only. She asked him what his children had eaten the night before. He looked up, surprised, and said, pot roast. My daughter set the table. My son said grace. The judge wrote something down. Then she denied the petition. Vera Brennan walked out of the courthouse without looking at her son-in-law. But the next Sunday she sat in the same pew, and after the service she put a hand on Caroline's shoulder and asked, in a small voice, if she might come for Sunday dinner sometime. Wesley said yes. Ruth, sitting 2 rows back, let out a breath she had been holding since October. It would be more than a year before Wesley Hale asked Ruth Avery a quiet question on a porch in early spring, with crocuses up in the bed by the railing. Ruth said yes the way a careful person says yes. It would be longer still before Caroline Hale stood at the front of a small chapel in a white dress with a green satin sash, holding the green spiral notebook open to a page that said, in her round 8-year-old hand from the very first week, 3 words and nothing more, Mrs. Avery made eggs. But that came later. That Tuesday morning in September, all that happened was this. A woman in a blue cardigan stood on a porch with a casserole dish and a math worksheet. A man inside a quiet kitchen finally heard a true sentence. And a town that had been watching from a careful distance learned, watching that light stay on, that a family is not a thing you lose all at once or find all at once, but a thing you build, 1 shared breakfast at a time, until the table looks full again. Roy Mulvey, who told the story half a dozen times at the diner that year, always ended it the same way. The light came back on in that kitchen, he would say, lifting his coffee. It came back on because a stranger walked across town with a casserole and a math worksheet, and a tired man finally let himself be helped. And once it came back on, it stayed on.